record on. I've got Logic Pro, so I'll just press record and let it record everything, and then send you, and you can sort it all out, all the rambling.
Awesome, perfect. Okay, let's just start, because I always find people say the best things before I start recording and after I hit stop recording. So let's just go.
Well, you'll be happy. I am recording this in OBS, so
awesome.
Yeah, the quality of the video is not nearly what my channel is used to, but we'll just deal with that.
That's fine. We are a podcast.
So it's the audio that's important.
Optimizing for both. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for agreeing to chat with me today. I had a fascinating argument in the comments of a Facebook group with Brent here, and thankfully that got us in conversation about some other more interesting topics. Steve I've known for a long time, old friend and business partner. So let's get straight into it, gents. I'd be really interested to talk about all things Buddhism, and anything else that comes up along the way and along the tangents, really. So why don't you introduce yourselves, anything you want to plug or promote, and what your experience is with Buddhism. Let's start there.
Sure. Do you mind if I go first?
Yes, please do.
Okay, great. So hi, my name is Brenton Lengel. I am a poet, playwright. I am the author of the Ringo-nominated comic series Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. And I am also a YouTuber and a practicing Buddhist. Actually, former young men's division leader for Hamilton Heights in Harlem, New York City, with Soka Gakkai International. And I've been a practicing Buddhist since 2014. And also did some studying in college on Buddhism. And when I was a young teenager in the Midwest and the Bible Belt, I identified as a Buddhist, but mainly just to troll Christians. So
I know that one.
Yeah. So, but then I got much more serious about it starting in 2014, and it's become one of the big things that I talk about is Buddhist philosophy. I'm very much into the Lotus Sutra. My sect is Nichiren Buddhist, which is a Japanese sect. And we're very heavily focused on the laity. Soka Gakkai is a lay Buddhist movement, and we are in 192 countries and do a ton of work with the UN. I do want to preface everything, though. I am not an official spokesman for SGI. I am no longer a young men's leader because I am no longer a young man. You can see my hair's turning gray. So I'm speaking for myself as a Buddhist, not for the organization.
Fair, thank you. Very interesting and complete intro. Thank you very much. Steve, how about yourself?
Well, that was very interesting. I didn't know what to expect, and I think that's what makes this a lot more interesting. In fact, I've been practicing Buddhism on and off, I'd say, since 1997, about 1998. But I first started taking it seriously when I realized that I couldn't keep things going the way they were in my life, and I started meditating. Joined what was known at the time as the FWBO in London, and the interesting thing is that the FWBO is mostly Mahayana based. But it does bring in a little bit of every single sect. So my first experience with Buddhists and with Buddhism and with other Buddhists was non-sectarian. I now live in Thailand, and of course Thailand is a Theravadan country. And it's been interesting because my deeper experiences have come here. I ordained as a monk for a few weeks, just as an experience. It was part of a degree I was doing as well as a personal experience. And I am now part of a group of people, or I meditate with a group of people who follow the Thai forest monk tradition, which is a very, very pure form of Theravada Buddhism. But again, I do identify as non-sectarian, to put it that way, which is why I think this is going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah, could I... Well, first, could I have a few less ums and lip smacks, please, Steve? That'd be lovely for the edit.
Oh, I am sorry.
It's all good, mate. It's fine. The other thing is, let's define our terms. I don't want dictionary definitions. I just what it means to you, because Theravada and Mahayana has been something that I've heard a few times, and I have a very layman's understanding of it. But I think it'd be really useful and helpful for the uninitiated to break down what those broad categories mean.
Sure. I can give you a quick breakdown from my perspective, and Stephen, you can correct me if there's something that's out of sync with your tradition. But Theravada and Mahayana are essentially the two major Buddhist traditions. Theravada is older. I believe it translates to School of the Elders, and it focuses very heavily on, I think, individual enlightenment is the goal. Something along the lines of reaching moksha, which would be the Hindu term for it. Mahayana is newer, and it is more focused on universal enlightenment. So sort of the idea in Mahayana, one of the central ideas is that everyone is already a Buddha, since time is an illusion. We just don't realize it because of fundamental darkness, which is like the befuddlement of ordinary people. Sort of how consciousness conspires to hide the true nature of reality from us, just as part of the conscious experience. So I would say that like the big differences are Theravada tends to be in Southeast Asia, countries like Thailand. Mahayana tends to be in China, Japan, and it's referred to as the Great Vehicle. So it's more or less a method for bringing the entire world to enlightenment, as opposed to just an individual. But again, I am much more familiar with Mahayana tradition, and specifically Nichiren tradition, so I may be saying something that doesn't 100% track with what a Theravada practitioner considers.
Over to you, Steve.
Okay. I think, firstly, let me know, Chris. Do let me know if things are sounding okay. I may have to move the microphone a bit further.
Oh, it's sounding better now, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Brenton, you pretty much summarized, I think, what the terms are, and it's what you would read if you went into, well, actually what I would say is that it's precisely what you'd read or expect to hear from a Mahayanist. It is true to an extent, but I think this idea that Theravadins focus only on individual enlightenment is taken a little too far, perhaps. I do think that Theravada is very much more focused on the monk life, and monks do they get ordained and they're focusing on their own personal development, eventually towards enlightenment. But it does at the same time. Obviously, there is a lot of focus on teaching. There is, in traditional Theravadan circles, there is very much this idea that the laity is not ready to be enlightened. And in fact, if you go back 150 years in Thailand, there was this sense that nobody, but the time had passed. We were in the dark period. I can't remember what it's called traditionally in Buddhism. But we got to the point when people cannot be enlightened anymore. So it was just a case of studying the scriptures and keeping things together as much as they could. That's where the Forest tradition came along and sort of blew this all apart and said, no, we are capable of not only becoming enlightened in this lifetime, but we are capable of helping each other towards this goal. So I'd say, firstly, focusing on definitions, I'd say that the only thing is that I think it's a bit less cut and dry than what is normally defined.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably
beyond
correct.
The binary, you could say, right?
It's a spectrum.
Exactly. And I think this is what, when Chris mentioned this yesterday, it's what fascinated me. The podcast being called Beyond Binary. The fact that I personally, I meditate once every couple of weeks with a group of people who, most of whom are very strongly attached to the Forest tradition. So I enjoy bringing in elements of Zen, of Tibetan Buddhism, a little bit, because I do personally bring a little bit of everything. It's a bit like a nutritious diet, as it were. I feel that by taking what resonates with me from all traditions. I get the best of I get the best sort of mix of teachings that will push me closer and closer towards becoming aware of what reality is. And I do agree with you, and with the Mahayanist idea that we are already enlightened. I think the Theravadins would agree as well. It's just a case of becoming aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, so we definitely have a point of agreement there. It's really interesting also because I love that approach. I think it is a great idea to be bringing in as many traditions as possible. And it's funny that I'm saying that as a Nichiren Buddhist, because Nichiren Buddhists tend to be very, very bare bones, very heavily focused just on the Lotus Sutra, sometimes to the detriment of other sutras. But also you've got to remember, Nichiren Buddhism, and especially Soka Gakkai, is a very heavily populist movement. And like we don't have priests or monks or nuns or anything like that. And one of our primary doctrines is that everyone is spiritually equal, whether you are enlightened or not, whether you realize you are enlightened or not. In fact, we do have a particular doctrine which essentially states that, you know, not only is enlightenment possible, but it is possible for everybody within a single lifetime. And there's a number of different doctrinal things that it's focused on, but the doctrine is essentially 10,000 realms in a single moment of existence. That's what it translates to in English anyway. So what you're describing your practice, and I'm very interested to hear about this forest tradition because I'm an Appalachian Trail 2,000 miler and I love the wilderness. So that is already speaking to me. But usually with my practice, the way we meditate is by chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which is the title of the Lotus Sutra, over and over again to a very special mandala called a Gohonzon. The Gohonzon was first created by Nichiren Daishonin in like the year 1200 in Japan, and what differentiates it from standard mandalas like that you'd see like with Tibetans is that instead of pictographs and pictures, it is just like medieval Japanese kanji. And I don't read Japanese, which ironically makes it a little bit easier for me because the goal with chanting to the Gohonzon is that you are chanting to your own Buddha nature. It's almost compared to a mirror, and the act of meditating or chanting is like polishing the mirror so that you can see your true self. Nichiren was very, very critical of other Mahayana sects in his time, which I would say in that time and place, I think he was probably right to be as critical of them, but sometimes people do carry that a little too far and become sectarian, which is something that, I tend to be very much more chill about. There are issues that I will have with other sects and other systems of belief, but it's more if they are promoting something that is inherently destructive to, I guess, the mission of Buddhism, and to the truth that is revealed like through the Lotus Sutra and through the Buddhist practice. It sounds like with your forest monks, it's a little like what we do call a tozo, where Soka Gakkai practitioners will get together, usually in somebody's apartment, around a particular Gohonzon. Then we'll also go to our culture centers every 2 weeks out of the month, and we all chant in unison to a larger Gohonzon, which is a heck of an incredible experience, to tell you the truth. It's really musical to hear people chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, like all together. You get like 100 people in a room, blows your mind.
Sorry, Chris, you can edit that out. What's interesting about this is that I normally find myself debating Theravadins. I normally find myself debating, in a subtle way perhaps, in our discussions, I find myself bringing a bit of Mahayana to the very cut and dried forest monk teachings. So this is fun and different in a way, because I'm going to do what I normally don't do. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to bring very much our perspective, or the perspective that I have had from my experiences here over the last few years especially. But the forest tradition sort of came about in the same way as Nichiren, as a criticism of the current what was thought of as very corrupt and lazy and meaningless practices of the time, very academic based. They started with a monk called Ajahn Mun and several other monks at the time. And the tradition that I particularly follow here, that my group follows, was started by Ajahn Chah. But they left forest life. Sorry, they sort of left aside the typical village or city, more sort of limited study-based Buddhism, and walked into the forests and led very much a more down-to-earth, bare-bones existence, following very much the purity of the Buddha's teachings. The fact that he stated, what was stated was, all you need is food, medicine, shelter, and you'll be okay. You'll eventually understand the meaning of life. So I think what I love about that is that it does take away the necessity, I think, of all the and do help me out, Chris, here, because you have a lot of experience with this, I think. The grandiosity of a lot of what came later with Mahayana, which one could say is not necessary. On the other hand, I've been reading, when I do delve into Mahayana, what I love about it is the concept of skillful means. Mm-hmm. And this is why I would say I'm ultimately non-sectarian, because the Buddha, one of the things, most important teachings I think that he brought, was that there is no path other than, there is no single path, there is no right or wrong. I mean, we're ultimately coming to a reality where, as you yourself said, time is an illusion, mm-hmm. along with absolutely everything else. So to talk about a path, to talk about a correct way of achieving this realization is in itself an illusion. And skillful means does bring us to the fascination of all these incredibly diverse varieties of Buddhism. I mean, I love reading about Zen. I love reading about the weirdness of certain Tibetan sects. Vajrayana, we're talking here about Theravada and Mahayana, but a lot of Tibetan Buddhists would say, well, Vajrayana is the ultimate path, because it cuts through even quicker than all the others. But again, I would say all of them are exactly the same in the sense that they are about switching on a light, as it were. Or beyond that, to put it into nonsense, it's simply about suddenly realizing that this, exactly what is happening right now, is everything that exists. Mm-hmm. So to me, there's absolutely the difference between the Thai Theravadan tradition, Nichiren, the very, very elaborate Tantra teachings of Vajrayana, and coming around full circle to the simplicity of Zen, for example, which I find very, very, very similar in many, many ways to the Thai forest tradition.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because, so I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. I take it you've heard of him, Stephen, but just in case you haven't.
I love Alan Watts. And I'd love to bring Alan Watts into Thai forest tradition.
Mm-hmm.
His drum and bass remixes, by the way, are the best.
The music, like...
If those not familiar with his drum and bass era, wow, just mm-hmm. phenomenal. Just play drum and bass tunes with Alan Watts' speech in the background.
I'll tell you, yeah, he's phenomenal, and he talks about essentially kind of like the what a shaman is essentially, or was in prehistorical societies, and it seems like a lot of what you are describing with regard to the forest tradition seems to be a return to that, in that the shaman is the man who goes out, who goes beyond the pale, the paling being the border separating the village from, the rest of the world, and is by themselves and is alone. What's very interesting is it really speaks to me, like before I became a Buddhist, when I was through hiking the Appalachian Trail, walking 2,200 miles from Maine to Georgia, I spent about 6 months living in the woods. And I came to that same conclusion, that the only thing we really need To be happy, to be fulfilled is food, water, shelter, and friends, or as I've heard people break it down to, food, water, and love. And I love that you also brought in medicine, because yes, we need that too. But yeah, Watts has some phenomenal stuff about that. But what I wanted to jump on, just in case, because I think we're using some very technical terms here, so we should explain for the uninitiated what skillful means is, or as my sect calls it, expedient means. And I believe, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I believe that actually comes directly from the 4th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which is the central chapter for Nichiren Buddhism, and a very important text for a number of Mahayana schools. The concept probably has predated that, but that's where I get it from. And essentially, my understanding of skillful/expedient means is that the Buddha will kind of lie to you. Like, not really, but in the sense that the way it's explained in the Lotus Sutra is that, like, imagine you've got a father with a large family, and the kids are living inside the house. They've lived inside the house their whole lives. They have no concept of anything outside of the house. So then suddenly one day the house catches fire, and the kids are sitting there just playing with their toys. They don't know what fire is, and the dad's sitting there going, "Oh man, what am I going to do here? I can run in, I can knock maybe one of them out and drag them out. I can't tell them the house is on fire. They don't know what fire is." So he actually comes up to the kids and he says, "Hey kids, you see all these toys that you've got right here that you really like? And you see that door right over there? So there are toys just like those on the other side of the door, but way better. So just go through that door." And the kids, of course, jump up, run out of the house. House burns down, but the family's saved. And the way the story actually ends is that the kids get out and they're like, "Hey, wait a minute, Dad. There's no toys out here. You lied to us." And he's like, "Well, no, I didn't really lie to you, because I told you what you needed to hear in that moment so that I could get you out of the house. But also, since I'm super rich, and he gives them, like, giant cool white elephants to ride and stuff. But the point being is that the metaphor that story is getting at is that in certain traditions, there will be pieces of doctrine that were created for specific people in specific times and place that spoke to their values and who they were and how they understood their relationship with the world and each other. And so the Buddha would give them a teaching based upon that wouldn't be the literal truth of what he was getting at. But in fact, what he was getting at, if they followed it, would eventually lead them to better understanding of, that Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, of the mystic law. And so essentially it's like the Buddha is a bit of a consequentialist, and he will give teachings that are important for you in the moment. And it's important, therefore, to not always be as attached to specific sutras, specific teachings, but more to see them as a step on a larger path. So that's essentially the concept of expedient means, as I understand it. And Stephen, you can correct me if there's anything that's slightly different in your tradition.
Yeah, just jumping in quickly, I think that is the style of most education systems I've noticed. So if anyone studied science particularly, you'll learn it at secondary school, and then they say, "Okay, forget what we taught you in primary. That was just, a simplified model. It's actually this." And then you get to university and they're like, "Okay, well, look, full disclosure, that was all lies. Like, that's not really how the periodic table or electrons work. But it was a simplistic model to get you some understanding and on your path onto the next level. Now, here's what it's really like." And then if you do a master's, they're like, "Okay, sorry guys, we did it again." And then when you get the PhD, truth is, we don't really know. We have no idea what we're doing. Can you help us? Can you?
Oh man, that's so great to hear. And I've speculated before that not to throw a huge bomb into the mix, but like transphobes, when they freak out when they learn that sex is more than just chromosomes and stuff. I've always thought that there was a little bit of Mara there, a little bit of like clinging to previous and past teachings, and we can see a parallel right there.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
I was just going to say it's one of the reasons why I've taken Emily, my daughter. I have a 12-year-old daughter. I've taken her out of school by mutual agreement, and will homeschool her now, because I think, again, bringing back the concept of skillful means, I think sometimes skillful means that schools use can be a little bit cumbersome, because they are the simplification to a group of students can mean that they miss out on a hell of a lot of exciting stuff. So I think it is a great example of what skillful means, but it's a great way of how it can be clumsily applied. But I don't think in Buddhism it is. I think it's beautifully applied. I think particularly if you are given the choice, or you are told, you are opened up to this fact, you are made to understand what skillful means. I was just going to backtrack a bit, tell a story that's similar to the one that you told about the father getting all his kids to come out at once because of by lying to them about the toys. I don't know if you've heard this one, where there was a monk in the time of the Buddha who left his young wife to become a full-time monk. Basically left all worldly things behind, but he could not get his wife, and could not get the idea of sex and sensual pleasures out of his mind, and came to the Buddha and said, look, I can't focus on meditation. And the Buddha said, well, look, there's this realm that you can get to. If you get to the dhyanas, things are going to get nicer and nicer, and eventually you'll get to this realm if you're really diligent, if you really focus on your meditation, where you will be surrounded by beautiful, beautiful maidens who are going to make all your dreams come true. It's the most pleasurable. Forget your home village, forget your wife. This will be more pleasure than you can imagine. So focus on your meditation. Don't worry. And he went back, and he suddenly, he had all the motivation in the world to spend all day meditating. And of course, what happened in the end was that he achieved the realization way beyond what the Buddha had told him, and came back to the Buddha and said, hey, thanks, basically. Thanks for lying to me. But yes, skillful means is that's basically what it is. It's seeing where the person is at and giving them what they need to get to where they need to go.
Yeah, there's a quote in the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra, which is it's the lifespan chapter, which is sort of held to be the beating heart of Mahayana Buddhism. It's one of my favorites. But yeah, it says it right here. Like, I pulled it up on my phone. This is the Buddha speaking to them about his lifespan. As good men, if there are living beings who come to me, I employ my Buddha eye to observe their faith and to see if their faculties are keen or dull. And then, depending upon how receptive they are to salvation, I appear in different places and preach to them under different names and describe the length of time during which my teachings will be effective. Sometimes I make my appearance and say that I am about to enter nirvana, and also employ different expedient means to preach the subtle and wonderful law, thus causing living beings to awaken joyful minds. Good men, the thus come one observes how among living beings there are those who delight in the little law, meager in virtue and heavy in defilement. For such persons I describe how in my youth I left my household and attained... I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. But in the truth is that since that time I have attained Buddhahood is extremely long, as I have told you. It is simply that I use expedient means to teach and convert living beings and cause them to enter the Buddha way. Good men, the scriptures expounded by the thus come one are all for the purpose of saving and emancipating living beings. Sometimes I speak of myself, sometimes of others. Sometimes I present myself, sometimes others. Sometimes I show my own actions, and sometimes those of others. All that I preach is true and not false. Why do I do this? The thus come one perceives the true aspect of the threefold world exactly as it is. There is no ebb or flow of birth and death. There is no existing in this world and later entering extinction. It is neither substantial nor empty, neither consistent nor diverse. Nor is it what those who dwell in the threefold world perceive it to be. All such things the thus come one sees clearly and without error. And I'm sorry to drop a giant scripture bomb on everybody there. It's just one of my favorite ones. He goes on to say, because living beings have different natures, different desires, different actions, and different ways of thinking and making distinctions, and because I want to enable them to put down good roots, I employ a variety of causes, conditions, similes, parables, and phrases, and preach different doctrines. This, the Buddha's work, I have never for a moment neglected.
It's incredibly rich and incredibly beautiful in many ways. One thing that's interesting, I don't know much about the Pure Land sect. I don't know much about Nichiren. And maybe, Chris, you're waiting for us to bring some controversy into this to make it a little bit more fun.
Are we going to dunk on Pure Land? It's going to be so...
Now, what I wanted to ask, because let's, I think in the same way, and I'll throw this back on myself as a representative at this point of the forest, of Theravada. Theravada is always, it's known as pejoratively as Hinayana by a lot of people. A lot of people refer to it as the lesser vehicle, as what is given to people who are simply, who just need a few moral teachings to keep them on path for the next 50,000 lifetimes until they're ready to become Mahayana Buddhists. So there is that. But on the flip side, there are people who look at some specifically Pure Land sect traditions and say, well, again, that's a teaching for people who aren't ready to actually get to the nitty-gritty and try and,
So what does Pure Land mean?
So, okay, this is fun. So the Buddha said in one of the sutras, and Stephen, maybe you can fill us in on exactly which one it was, but there are numerous references throughout the sutras to the Buddha's Pure Land. In fact, in the prayers that I chant every morning and evening in Gangyo, it talks about how at the end of a kalpa being a very, very long time, when everything is destroyed in a great fire, this my land remains pure and tranquil. So essentially the Buddha gave a teaching to people who had said essentially that they feared they couldn't attain enlightenment within this lifetime because of the world that they lived in with all of its evil, essentially, and all the problems that were going on. And so he said, basically, if you chant the name of this particular Buddha right before you die, you will be reborn in a Buddhist Pure Land. Essentially like a heaven realm almost, and you can attain enlightenment there. Nichiren Daishonin, there was a whole sect that came up around this, and Nichiren Daishonin was heavily critical of the Pure Land Buddhists for this particular sect, because it was essentially trading this existence for some hypothetical heaven in another lifetime, which I would rightly, I think, see, and Nichiren definitely saw it as incredibly destructive. I'll just say that I've spent a lot of my time arguing politics with anarcho-capitalists and objectivists, and there was this internal objectivist memo that went out that was so we've been trying to convert Buddhists to Ayn Rand's objectivism, and it's not working, but there's this one sect, the Pure Lands, and I think we can get them. So it's a sect that gets a lot of heat from other Buddhist sects. I think from the Theravadins, and definitely from Nichiren Daishonin.
Interesting. So there seems to me to always be, especially with something as established and ancient as Buddhism now, a marketplace of ideas and splitting and merging. And as you've both alluded to, one tradition may come up with the same conclusions after hundreds and hundreds of years of thought, even though they're using a different vehicle, right? Can come to similar conclusions, and the circle completes. The problem I often see is that as much talk as there is of Buddhists sort of releasing their ego and their pride, I see lots and lots of evidence that, like all in-groups, there is reason to believe that our way is the right way. I mean, why would you do it otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And they're doing it wrong. And I think that also gets mixed in, not just with basic group psychology, but also where you have the lay people worshipping the monks and their teachings, venerating them, and there they become like the fan club of certain monks, and build expensive statues and donate to certain temples, and they're like, yeah, my temple's better than your temple, your beliefs are shit.
Yeah.
And I think often it's necessary to disentangle the intentions of Buddhism at its core and the fact that it's a very human institution. Although Buddha may be all about relinquishing and getting rid of ego and pride, that doesn't mean the institution is free from it.
Oh, certainly not. We would call that fundamental darkness and devilish functions. Those are two terms that we would use. To sort of try to explain to people, if they're not familiar with what Buddhism is attempting to bring about, is it's different from, like, you'll hear people say Buddhism is not a religion, it's more of a philosophy. And I think, Chris, you and I have had some issues with that, and we may get into those.
Yeah, well, let's get into it now quickly. So,
yeah.
Buddha said, right, don't make a religion out of me. Wasn't that one of his teachings? Like,
I don't know if he just said don't make a religion out of me. He would say that I think you shouldn't be attached to him as a figure. And on top of that, you've got like Bodhidharma, famous monk who supposedly brought Buddhism from India to China, who has the famous quote, if you see the Buddha, kill the Buddha, because the Buddha that you see is not the real Buddha. Because, spoiler, you're the real Buddha right now, as is everyone and everything. But Stephen, it sounded like you had something to say there, so I'm gonna let you jump in.
No. Carry on.
Oh,
and
okay.
I will jump in. If I need to, I will jump in.
Okay, cool. So essentially what Buddhism, the reason why I think you can rightly say that Buddhism is a unique religion, or especially unique to Westerners, is Westerners tend to focus very heavily on like right belief, holding the right attitudes about the nature of reality for their sect. So, Martin Luther says, the just shall live by faith. This tends to get interpreted by a lot of major Christian sects as, if I believe in Jesus, therefore, that's the most important thing that I can do in my lifetime is be saved and believe that Jesus died for my sins. Whereas Buddhism and Hinduism, actually, before Buddhism, and Taoism as well, are more about creating a change in consciousness in the practitioner, to where they will experience reality and experience themselves and their relationship to the universe and each other in a different way. And this is... There's a number of attempts to try to reach this state of enlightenment. Enlightenment being the state where you stop, you don't forget your name. Like I used to think before I started practicing, to do Buddhism right, you go on top of a mountain and meditate until you transform into light, and bam, you're gone. And I remember I said that to my YMD leader when I first got in. I was like, and he's like, that sounds terrifying. But what nirvana means essentially is it means a cooling or a blow out, as in, whew, actually this actually isn't too serious. And the way you start to realize that reality is not what we think it is, and that you and I, and that we're not actually separate, is to start looking into the union of the figure and the background. So like if you look at like a piece of if you look at like a drawing on a white piece of paper, you couldn't have the black ink drawing without the white background. Consciousness makes you focus on the black ink drawing so that you can see what's in there, but in reality it's not the drawing and not the paper. It's the drawing and the paper together. So right there, you start to realize that there is what's called a dependent origination, where because one thing exists, like up, the other thing down must exist, and there's a polarity between the two. So essentially what you have is you have a polarity between up and down, darkness and light, life and death, and you start to realize that, wait a minute, so hang on for a second, if you need one for the other, are they really separate things? Or does it just seem like they're separate things? And so, as you proceed to go through Buddhist mental exercises and meditation, you start to realize that there's a lot more going on, and that the sort of shedding of the ego, the anatman, is not so much about like humbling oneself. It's about seeing that you are literally connected to everything that there is, and through that connection, you actually are everything that there is at all times and all places. Alan Watts famously said it in, the Hindu phrase, Tattvan Asi, you're it. So essentially, the practice brings about this change in consciousness. And once you experience this change in consciousness and you understand it viscerally, as opposed to just intellectually, it becomes a lot easier. I think a famous Zen master was asked, like, what's enlightenment like? He says it's exactly like everyday life, except a couple inches off the ground. So the everyday normal experience of yourself is not something that is different than enlightenment. It's exactly the same thing. It's just enlightenment is that plus this added realization that we are the universe experiencing itself, as Watts put it. So I think that is pretty much the project of Buddhism, and all of these various traditions grew up around that to kind of push this project through, and to continue to train people to have this experience. It's called Satori, or a shorter version of it, I think it's called a Kensho. The Hindus call it moksha. I actually did a debate where I argued that this is what Jesus experienced before he really began to preach. And so, that in a lot of ways is enlightenment. And so any kind of process that can get you there to that realization is an important and effective process. But at the same time, the ego, the thing, like the radar in your head that its job is primarily to protect you as a specific individual organism within this environment, also will conspire to prevent this realization. So it's kind of it's sort of a struggle with seeing past that. And there's important doctrines like anatman, which is non-self, that the self literally does not exist. It only seems to. But the fact of the matter is that this experience, this realization, is constantly hamstrung by the everyday realities of the world that we live in. And so that's, again, why the practice is so important. And it's not simply that we accept the doctrines, but that we actually live that way so that we don't get pulled back into thinking of ourselves as, just little me who is going to be living inside this body for, 80 or so years from cradle to grave, and then that's it. But actually, no, I am the process. I am life itself. I really think that's really what a Buddha is, or at least that's my understanding of it, and that's what I've gotten from Watts.
Brenton, I jumped in immediately just to say that was incredibly eloquent and beautiful. And Chris, if you wanted a clash of ideas here, it's going to be very difficult because... but also, I know very little about Nichiren, which is what you introduced us as, but I love Alan Watts. which is quite controversial for me to say here in my Thai forest monk group. Not controversial because people are very open, of course, but they would laugh. Put it that way. Well, I'm you know.
Well, Watts speaks to. I'm guessing most people in your Thai group are not Westerners.
No, they are Westerners actually.
Oh, they are
The
Westerners.
Westerners take it more seriously than the Thais, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
They come in. Most Thais, very few Thais follow the Thai forest tradition. Ironically, it's a very fringe group that's very, very respected,
Mm-hmm.
but because it's so like uncompromising.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing about the Thai forest tradition is that it's the polar opposite of something that has. There are other Theravadan traditions. There are other Theravadan forest traditions, like the Burmese, that have step-by-step approaches to meditation practice, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But the Thai forest tradition is very much like Zen. It's like just sit and realize. If you're expecting a teaching, you're going to get the rug pulled.
Yeah. Well,
Ajahn Chah, to give you an example, Ajahn Chah is the most well-known and, let's say, respected, venerated teacher in the forest tradition. He's been dead for about 30 years, I think, but he had a lot of Western disciples. Most of his students were Westerners, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And they would obviously finally get to meet him. That will be their major aim, to be able to go to his monastery in the northeast of Thailand and follow his very, very austere style of practice. And they would walk around thinking he was the Buddha himself. And one of his disciples, very, very well-known Western monk, American monk actually, called Ajahn Sumedho. This has been recorded, so if I said the wrong name, I apologize. He saw him chewing betel nut. You know betel nut, the Thai. It's something that villagers in Thai. Chris, you know what it is, right? The red.
Yeah, I
nut.
think it's popular in India as well.
Yeah. And he came up to him. He said, there are several, not just that, because he's chatting to the laity in a bit of a, too relaxed way and everything. He said, you're meant to be this huge figurehead. You are, your behavior sometimes. And this was an American junior monk talking to one of the most respected forest tradition monks in Thailand. And he said, he plucked up his courage and said, I feel that you're kind of slacking a little bit. And he just knelt and said, I'll do the best I can. And then a couple of days later, Ajahn Sumedho, the American, walks around the corner and catches Ajahn Chah smoking a cigarette. And he is shocked. And he again says, really, is this how we're meant to be behaving? And he said, look, I'm hearing you. I will improve my practice. But maybe, Sumedho, maybe this is a teaching to you. Maybe you should not be looking for the Buddha in me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And there's been a number of stories. Hang on, I was getting some feedback there on somebody. But yeah, no, there's been a number of times that you see like Westerners will go and find like a Hindu guru or something out there, and then they get very excited thinking that they've met kind of a magical person, and then they find out he smokes and he gets angry sometimes, and he's got a girlfriend, and then they just wrap up and everybody goes home. I think
my favorite example of that is Krishnamurti.
Mm-hmm.
Right, who his first act as head of the Order of the Star, the cult that had been formed around him, was to disband the order. It's like,
yes,
thanks, but no.
Well, it's people get very excited about teachers, and I think it's very important. Like Soka Gakkai is really, really big on the oneness of mentor and disciple. So people get very excited about, Daisaku Ikeda, who is the current honorary president of Soka Gakkai, the third president. He's the guy who took it from Japan. Because Soka Gakkai essentially was founded by Tsuneburo Makaguchi and Joshi Toda. Makaguchi was a high school principal, and he fused Buddhism with the teachings of John Dewey. And created this Buddhist humanist organization for everyday lay people that was associated with the Nichiren Shoshu priesthood. And during World War II, there was a declaration that everyone in the country had to essentially put a charm on their gohanzon, or their shrines, that would acknowledge the Emperor of Japan as a living god, and therefore you would also be approving of Japan's fascism and militarism. And Makaguchi refused and was sent to a Japanese prison for it, both him and Joshi Toda. Makaguchi was an old man. He died in that Japanese prison. And when Joshi Toda came out, he had been enlightened within the prison. He took the mostly destroyed organization and brought it from almost nothing to 750,000 households in Japan. And right before he died, he told Daisaku Ikeda that he had a dream that SGI would spread to every country in the world, and that it was his job to make that happen. Which Sensei has done a really incredible job. He's in his 80s now, and we work with the UN. He submits a world peace proposal every year. We're in 192 countries. But it's also very important to realize that, when we're talking about Sensei, when we're talking about Daisaku Ikeda or anybody else, you don't want to put them on too high of a pedestal, because ultimately, yeah, they're the Buddha, but so are you, so is everybody, so's the rock over there. There's no use putting on airs. Or at least that's how I like to think about it.
I think that's the theory, but just inevitably these power structures form. It's just human nature, and that'll be my main point here. Is in that conversation about how successful and good your sect was, you talked about the number of converts like it was a business KPI, right?
Yeah.
It's proof that it's a good school. But it's,
well, I don't know if I would say why. I don't know if I would say widespread teaching is proof that it's a good school. But I would.
There is a level of organizational prestige that people want to attain, right? And that's as good as the organization and as good as its leaders often. And there have been cases, as we've already talked about, where that's been ripe for abuse. There's definitely now starting to be more and more scandals emerging, as you have these young 18-year-old girls going out to India and Thailand to join a yoga retreat or a Buddhist meditation retreat, and there's been a lot of, let's call it what it is, sexual abuse by these people, taking advantage of their position of power and the fact that they have a bunch of people prostrating in front of them, looking for higher truth and looking to worship someone that has attained something they hope to. Right?
Yeah, and you have the same issue, with the Catholics, in the West, which became widespread knowledge in the 90s. There's been a lot of sexual abuse in, Protestant circles, particularly evangelicals.
My point is power corrupts, and I think often because of the abuse and power of Christianity in the West, Buddhism is offered as a counterpoint to it. But I would just like to say that it is also a human organization and has some of those problems as well, especially as in the West, as Steve said, the people who are kind of late to the party, like born again Christians, are always the most extreme.
Yeah.
Right? And similarly, there's probably people late to Buddhism who are trying really hard to be the best Buddhist, to get the high score. So perhaps, that they're more austere and sincere as a small minority niche group. But in Thailand, certainly, where Buddhism is just the water people breathe, and a very broad church, shall we say, that you see all sorts of good and bad people joining monasteries. It's very controversial to say, but there was a movie released in Thailand that caused a huge furore because the premise of the movie was two men had committed a murder and then this could easily escape by shaving their head and joining a monastery. They were anonymous.
Oh, geez.
This happened all the time, and this is one of the problems that Thailand has with recognizing something that they themselves talk about all the time. Just going back a little bit to something you were just talking about, Chris, about is the success of a certain organization a reflection of how good it is? It can be, it may not be. I just want to jump in again as I feel right now the representative of Thai forest tradition. It couldn't be less successful. It really is a damp squib in a way. There's like, not even Thais follow it. It's a disaster in terms of recruitment. It's an absolute disaster because it's so uncompromising. But it's recognized simply for its, but it really is like that amazing jazz musician that everyone hates to hear, listen to. No one will really listen to him, but people just buy their records and put them up to say, well, I understand the music.
Steve, do you know the difference between a jazz guitarist and a rock guitarist? So a rock guitarist will play 4 chords to 1,000 people, and a jazz guitarist will play 1,000 chords to 4 people.
Oh, that's funny. You know, this oddly enough does tie in with Soka Gakkai, because one of our most famous members is Herbie Hancock, who
Really?
yeah.
I had no idea.
There is
I do love jazz, by the way. I do love jazz.
Oh yeah, there is a huge there's actually, with Soka Gakkai in particular as an organization, if you watch the recent Pixar movie Soul, Herbie Hancock consulted on that, and I have a distinct impression. I don't have any confirmation on this, but I really think that if you watch Soul and you look at like what it's talking about and also some specific details, Soka Gakkai has a large African-American jazz presence in it, and we will often do cultural presentations that tend to be musical in nature at our meetings. And like, I got to tell you, there's a great video that Herbie Hancock put out, which is Buddhism and Creativity, where he goes into it and how his Buddhist practice impacts his jazz music. So it's nice that we've got a little bit of synchronicity there.
I had no idea. Sorry, I'm just literally enjoying this conversation so much that I forgot that we're doing a podcast, Chris. I forgot.
That's the best way, mate. Like mindfulness, right?
Mm-hmm. Be in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I was going to say. Sorry, yeah, I'll go for it. I was going to go back to something you said earlier. Well, when you were talking about to put it one way, the black writing against the white paper, and you carried on that analogy for a while, and it just made me think of quantum physics. And it's something I am. I love my science. I love my maths. I love my physics. I haven't done anything for 30 years. I've just completely ignored all that side of my childhood interests. But now that my daughter is my pupil now, I took the risk and responsibility of taking her out of school and homeschooling her, so I need to make sure that I know my shit. Are you allowed to swear on this, Chris?
Fuck yes.
No, it means that I can, as I told actually my parents, the only reason I took her out of school is because I wanted an excuse to come back to science, and actually my aim is to understand quantum physics one day. But I just over and over again, it's just so clear, and it's not. I know it gets branded as sort of populist, fantasist. I can't think of the right word right now. But quantum physics, when it's co-opted by the spiritual community, that they don't really know what's going on there. But there are.
It's just energy, man. It's just all energy.
Yeah. If you just put it at that and leave it at that, and don't go down to look at the nitty-gritty equations, that's what it will end up as. But what you were saying just now describes exactly what happens in quantum physics, which is there's an up and a down. One particle spins one way, the other will spin the other, and there needs to be this opposing sort of there's so many things that match up in the way quantum physics attempts to explain the world, because it hasn't managed yet, as we know. There has been no agreed upon sort of explanation. It's just that the math works, but I don't know
Wouldn't it be sad if we ever arrived at the destination, though? I think it's the journey, right? And there's this
it's the friends we made along the way.
Yeah, and I don't think physicists will ever be like, all right, guys, pack up your shit, we're done. That's it.
Well, I don't think you could ever be done. I mean, there's always an infinite amount of information that you can have, and the universe seems to get more it seems to get more complex just in relation to our ability to discover things about it. But I will agree with you. It was really fascinating to me when I was reading. I took an Asian philosophy course in college, and one of the things that we read was the Upanishads, which is not a Buddhist text; it's a Hindu text. But one of the things that I found really, really interesting about it was that throughout the Upanishads, they were going through this section where they kept telling stories about the origin of the universe, and they kept telling them in different ways, and they were directly contradictory of each other, because none of them was the point was not to that the actual story as it said had happened, but that it was pointing at a higher truth. And so, with regard to one of my favorite stories in it was the one that started with something along the lines of, in the beginning there was death. And then death said, I am death, let me equip myself with a body. And then death proceeded to make a body, and then, because death devours, started to make children, and like its own children, and continue to devour that which it created. And so, the story, by the way, very metal, also kind of has echoes of sort of the myths, sort of like the early Greek myths. But it essentially seems to be getting at is that you have essentially in the beginning everything, undifferentiated reality, whatever you want to call that, the Godhead, Brahman. And then it becomes self-aware. Well, if it exists, something else must exist, so everything splits. And then that splits, and that splits, and that splits, and then on with the force of death, grabbing everything back and trying to put it back where it was at the beginning. And I find this seems to link up in broad strokes with ideas like the Big Bang, with a lot of stuff that I have read, in quantum physics. And I'm not saying that this is proof of anything other than I find it very interesting, because you will talk with sometimes Hare Krishnas will make some claims that because the Vedas predicted the age of the universe is very similar to what current scientists say the age of the universe is, therefore their beliefs are true. Which no, it just means even if Vedic magicians could figure that out, that doesn't necessarily mean anything other than they have this power. I mean, are we going to...
with a survivorship bias where 1 million people predict different numbers, and if they're ever accidentally right, that person is lauded as, that guy's the genius that got it right, and you're like, well,
Sure, but at the same time,
typewriters.
Yeah, I also still really like that story, and I find it very satisfying whenever it seems to gel with something that we're finding out about the universe. Ultimately, Buddhism, I think, is not about describing the world in the same way that science describes the world. But I think it's more a practice designed to help us see actual reality and figure out our relationships to ourselves and each other. But, at the same time, I find it very, very interesting. So I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen. And it is cool that you are teaching your daughter about science and making sure you get it right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Whether I'm going to get it right or not, that's another question. But going back to the relationship between science and Buddhism, there was, I can't remember now. I'm not very good at remembering names, especially when they're the names of certain Buddhist texts that are venerated throughout the Buddhist world, but are in Pali or Sanskrit. But there's this enormous text that was written in India that was very scientific about the way it was do you, Brenton, have an idea what we're talking about? It's something. This was perhaps around the time when Mahayana, or it may even be a Mahayana text. I'm not sure.
Which is the one? Are you referring to the one? I'm trying to remember. It starts with a K. It's the one that you'll often see like printed on like Tibetan prayer flags and stuff. Do not go by revelation. Do not go by. Is that?
I'm talking about the Abhidharma. This is something actually Theravadan, very, very early, very scientific in its approach. It is trying to, to me, it's the first scientific text. It's trying to make experiences into science. It's trying to turn it all into steps and everything.
I'm not familiar with this text, so I'm glad you brought it up.
It's sort of like the Western tradition where the earliest philosophers, it was science and thinking as well, right? Like it was all blended before the disciplines stratified and split.
I think this is why Theravada gets to this day so much stick as well. I mean, we talked about, we're both representing Pure Land of Nichiren, which is a sort of reaction from lazy Pure Land, and the Thai forest monk tradition is a reaction from lazy Theravada. But they're the two schools of Buddhism that get the most slack from being either too academic, too mind-based, too rational, or too lovey-dovey. Yes, you'll go to this heaven realm, and from there, just focus on the heaven realm, and then you'll be taken to. I think the fascinating thing about this is that everyone who came into contact with the teachings of the Buddha, and again, talking scientifically, we were making the assumption that the Buddha was a historical figure. It does sound like he was. I'm being very, very now, scientific.
So as I said on our last episode about Christianity, which I'd recommend, I really love that one. Perhaps Jesus is an amalgamation of the greatest hits of the 20 greatest thinkers. And to be honest, if he spoke with anyone or read any text, then he kind of was, right? Like the idea that Jesus came up with all of his teachings without having heard anyone else's ideas is befuddling to me. Like, obviously it's not true. He was part of a rabbinic tradition of debating things in a scholarly fashion. So whether it's one historical person or the amalgamation, it kind of doesn't matter to me, because either way, like, we all filter our best ideas, right, and merge them together in a synthesis and then share them. So like, it doesn't actually matter to me whether Buddha was a physical historical person, and that just either way, right, he would have been processing a bunch of different ideas and forming them into one great knowledge.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that the figure of Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha, I mean, it's important to understand that Buddha is not a figure, it's a title. Like, Buddha means the awakened one. It's the man who woke up, who saw the world as it is. And the story that we have of Siddhartha Gautama, that's just one of many, many, an infinite number of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And in fact, this is, again, going back to the Lotus Sutra, I believe this is the 7th chapter. It's the Treasure Tower chapter. And this, I remember when I first learned about it, this was where I was a little leery about Buddhism, and I'm like, oh, is this really something I want to do? And I got to the Treasure Tower chapter, and I was just like blown away. Because essentially what happens in this chapter is that all of these various figures from Hindu and Chinese mythology come together to experience Shakyamuni, Siddhartha Gautama's final teaching before he dies. And what he winds up doing is that in front of this, collection of, various Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and, the freaking dragons and wisdom kings and all that, is he raises his hands, and out of the ground emerges this giant treasure tower like a massive tower made of like 7 kinds of gems, just boom, straight up out of the earth. And he goes up to the tower and he opens the door, and inside the treasure tower is the Buddha who was Buddha before Buddha. And then he raises his hands, and the whole tower flies up into the air, and also the entire assembled figures rise into the air, and the Buddha proceeds to preach his final sermon in this crazy, like psychedelic, like it was like the Marvel movies of its time. But what was so incredible about this was that Nichiren Daishonin took the metaphor of the tower emerging from the earth as a metaphor for a person's own inherent Buddha nature emerging from their regular everyday life. And so just like the Buddha did something supposedly so incredible and amazing, like, we are the treasure tower. That's you, that's me, that's Stephen, that's everyone. But we get bogged down by our ego. We get bogged down by, just having to live in the world and to deal with the standard experience of consciousness. And so we kind of forget that. And the process of chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo to the Gohonzon, the process of meditating, is the process of remembering. I could compare it to polishing the mirror, but what I could also compare it to is there was a story about there was a Buddhist temple in an area, and there was and they had a giant golden Buddha statue, and coming through the area there was going to be an army coming through. So all of the monks got together and they covered the Buddha statue because they knew the army would melt it down and ship it away. So they covered it in like mud and rocks and it came out looking like just a normal stone Buddha statue. And of course, one day the monks, this goes on, everyone forgets that the statue is like that. And then eventually someone's sitting there chanting, and boom, the mud and the extra layer starts to break away. And they're like, the Buddha's golden. And similarly in that story, the shedding of the outer shell is the shedding of our ego. And what we find underneath is golden. It is so much better than what it actually appears to be. So I think that's a really important story. And it's also very important to understand that, like, this inherent Buddha nature that is inside all of us, it's not something that we have to attain. It's not something that we can lose or break. It is our birthright. It is something that can only be forgotten, and therefore again the process of living, the process of enlightenment is to remember.
You know that you've had that feeling before, right? And it's mentioned I've read this before, and I've had this before. We'll say, where have you been? When you have that moment where you're like, holy fuck, this is who I am. And there's that, and there are in Zen especially, and this is why I have a huge respect for Zen, because it just cuts everything away and goes straight to it. But it is very obviously Zen. I have my problems with the forest tradition, and if I were debating a Thai forest traditionist right now, I'd be, going straight in and saying, you guys are ruining what should be an amazing thing by being so sectarian about it, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea, it's as simple as this. Where have you been? I've had this sensation. I don't have it right now. I'm just remembering when I've had it. And it's been that moment where you're just looking into something and saying, well, it's exactly that. It's, this is who you are. It's funny because the way do you understand why I'm using the word you?
Yeah.
Because it's as if I'm using you as God almost right now, if we were to talk about religion. you is you is now I sound like what's his name? It's it is just the explosion of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And this is on a smaller level. This is when I first started meditating, and I first started having these small, like mini satoris, as
Mm-hmm.
you might say, mini moments of, oh, hell yeah, there's something extremely deep and exciting here. There's somebody. This is who I am. But it's almost like, again, I think. To me right now, and I'm sorry I'm rambling, but where have you been? Is because I've been holding this, this it's beyond words. But
Yeah.
I've had this experience a few times, very mini satoris. I don't want to, but this is why I couldn't give a fuck ultimately about different sects of Buddhism.
Yep. I'm right there with you.
It is that just we are so lucky that we have this. We're so lucky that we have this. We have somebody who managed to unite the whole idea of somebody or whatever it was. We don't, let's forget the whole historical side of it. But we have this, and it doesn't matter how it's expressed, but it gives us this ability to combine reality with reality without having to explain it in ways that are fundamental. There's no fundamentalism here because there's no words to explain anything. You can say, well, this is the way it is. This is the teaching. This is the path. This is the way it is.
Yeah, this, by the way, Chris, is one of the reasons why we do the chanting of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. It literally translates into, like, hail the mystical law of the Lotus Sutra. And the law is called mystic because it's extremely difficult to actually talk about and to wrap your mind around even for a short period of time. It's kind of that experience that
the idea that if you can describe Tao, then you haven't described Tao, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao.
So what I really picked up on, like, from what Steve just said, and I think I found this a few times in my life, like writing music is the obvious example. I haven't ever written a song consciously. Mm-hmm. I have discovered a song that was always there.
Yep. That's, and I'll say that, like, as an artist, like, when you catch lightning in a bottle, when you are creating something that's like, that it's like, this is really good, this is resonating. In a way, it feels like the universe is speaking through you because you are connecting with that principle. And I think that it's not a coincidence that, Soka Gakkai both does it verbally through chanting, but also that it has been so attractive to jazz musicians and to musicians and artists. The fact is that, I think a lot of what we can understand about life and the purpose of life is to be understood by analogy to music. Like the point of playing a song isn't to get to the end. I think Watts talked about it. He said,
play faster.
Exactly.
We're nearly there.
You were Alan Watts. I love that quote from Alan Watts.
Yeah. The point of the song is the singing. The point of the dance is the dancing. The point of the life is the living. It's just that. It's very, it's very ordinary, but also it gets completely overlooked, and it's very easy to forget.
What do you gents think then? Moving on, I'll take us home to the proliferation of all these mindfulness apps. Is that a good intro for the uninitiated, or is it the commercialization and watering down of some really important stuff?
Should I speak first or should I listen?
Why don't you go first, Stephen? Because I have been I've said a lot here.
Okay. No, it would be interesting to listen, but I think I should speak first and then listen because I have a part in this. I would say this because I am half Brazilian, half English, and in Brazil, meditation is only just meditation, mindfulness, not Buddhism. Now we're talking about something different. Mindfulness, awareness, etc. It's obviously been one of the big things on the planet for the last 6 years, and apps like Headspace and Calm have become huge, massive. I personally use Insight Timer simply because they have the bells, and I think the bells are fantastic. But we are developing a platform in Brazil for Brazilians who kept coming to me, kept coming to my brother, and saying, "How do I meditate? How do I do mindfulness? This sounds interesting." Finally, after years of them thinking this was just woo-woo, sort of, or at best woo-woo, a very Christian, very Catholic country, but at worst, from the evangelical side, this is the devil's work. I'm not sure if we can change their ideas on that. But
the story Brenton just told sounded very much like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign.
Oh yeah, the
towers,
the flying treasure tower.
But we will, this is it. We're slowly developing a mindfulness app for Brazilians, and hopefully we'll take it global. And we want to partner up with a lot of people with this. It's in very early days. So my opinion is that, well, I'll just say skillful means. How the hell could you say it's a bad thing? That's my opinion. I think, I've tried Headspace, I've tried Calm. I use Insight Timer because of the bells, as I say. But I think it's fantastic that it's become something big, and that there is money being popped into something that is positive. So
I won't disagree with you. Where I've seen it misused, and that's always the case, right? These things are rarely inherently evil, but they can be misused. I'm very skeptical of Sam Harris's mindfulness app because I'm very skeptical of Sam Harris and everything he does.
Yeah.
Like I said, I didn't even know he had a...
It's like in the top 10 most popular. It used to be one of the top ones. But my main thing is the using of mindfulness and Buddhism as a productivity hack. So rather than give people days off and reasonable mental health, they're just like, why don't you meditate for an hour a week, and then we can get more work out of you and less of you will have mental breakdowns. That might make us more productive as an office.
It's a very American thing. And like I'm sort of with you. I agree, Stephen. I do think it's good that Buddhist ideas are making it out into the world and that more people are getting interested in it, and hopefully this will encourage them to continue to pursue the tradition. What I fear with regard to mindfulness teachings and apps, and particularly Sam Harris, because from everything that I've seen, Sam Harris has essentially been trying to do Buddhism without compassion, and like that's the whole point. Like the idea that you can get anything out of mindfulness, that you can get anything out of, that's the toys. Like that I said in the original, that's the toys on the other side of the door are just like the toys you have now, but they're better. So it's the same thing of, hey, if you study Buddhism, if you use this app, this productivity, these things that you're doing, there's success on the other side of the door. So we could, I guess, look at it as something of an expedient means for certain people. But at the same time, I think that there is a real danger because, Buddhist teachings and these ways of thinking have been manipulated in terrible ways in the past. You had, there were great things like this with Makaguchi literally dying in a Japanese prison for the Lotus Sutra, for to stand against what Japan was doing at that time. But there were also Zen monks who were who became fascists and kamikazes.
I know Zen has a terrible history at the time.
Yeah,
I wrote a huge essay about that in my first degree, actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think Zen has a lot of cool stuff to it as well. I have a lot of respect for them, but I would agree with you on that. And Zen was one of the schools that Nichiren really heavily criticized. And I won't jump down that rabbit hole because it's fascinating, but
please.
Oh well, okay.
Are we limited? Is the
I'm not.
we're on?
We're all good.
Are we on? What network are we on? Are they going to cut us off?
No, only if we speak too much truth to power. I think Zoom runs on AWS servers, so every time I've insulted Jeff Bezos, I've been cut off.
Daddy Bezos. So, the Nichiren criticized, essentially, he said, a religion becomes unbalanced when it does one of four things, or multiple of the four. One is emphasize the total emphasis of reaching nirvana through direct perception through oneself alone. That was his criticism of the Zen school, because the Zen monks would cloister in their monasteries, would abandon the real world, would abandon people, and just focus on themselves, which, is counterproductive, because, again, you're trying to realize that you're not yourself, and there's the ego snaring you yet again. He also said that through... The other way is through external salvation via an absolute being. That is the criticism of the Pure Land school. Through the following of precepts and standards. I think this was the Superior Practices Japanese Buddhist school, that was follow these laws, follow these deontological ideas, and you will become enlightened. And then finally, I think it was the Sacred Word Buddhists, the thinking that you can gain for yourself through esoteric and occult rituals, since they had all these rituals to try to make it rain and all this other stuff. Ultimately, anytime a religion strays into one of these four categories, it becomes unbalanced, and it ironically pushes you further away from where you are trying to get, which again is simply to be brought to yourself, to understand yourself not just as yourself but as everything. So, one of the things I've heard that successful Zen gurus and masters will do when Westerners come to teach with them, they'll say, "Who are you?" And the Westerner will say, "Oh, well, my name is, Brenton Lengel." And he says, No, I didn't ask for your name. I asked for who are you? And he says, "Okay, well, I was born in this year, and I do this." And he said, No, I didn't ask for where you were born. I didn't ask for some facts about you. Who are you? And you gradually come to realize there's no answer you can actually give, because the self does not exist. There is only the appearance of the self. And so, once people are brought to that realization, you can continue to do the important work of, reaching enlightenment. But it's important to break up those holdouts from the ego. And we all suffer from it to a certain extent. I definitely do. And that's, again, why it's so important for us to practice Buddhism as opposed to simply be Buddhists. And that's one of the things that makes it very, very different from a Western standpoint. Now, what I will say also, just to pull it back to the mindfulness apps and to Sam Harris, and I do believe that Sam Harris, from a lot of the things that I've read, is a slanderer of the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the worst things, probably the worst thing you can do in my sect. Not to say bad things about the literature itself, but to slander the message of it, the idea that we are all connected and ultimately all the same. And, you only have to look at when he, talks about how we hypothetically might have to drop a nuclear bomb on a Muslim nation. Like, clearly that is a man who is in the throes of ego, who is dealing with fundamental darkness because he thinks, oh, I'm just Sam Harris. He doesn't realize that he's not just Sam Harris. He's also the person dropping the bomb, and he's the people getting hit by the bomb. So I think that there's a danger there, but I also think there is a very large opportunity. I've never used any of these mindfulness apps. I'm pretty happy with my, chanting and my Gohan zone. But, also that's me. I'm the guy that, when I'm studying martial arts, if I'm going to be at, a dojo, I want it somewhere in the back of my mind. I got to be thinking, are these people going to teach me to throw a fireball if I do really well? It doesn't have to happen, but I have to have that thought.
Yeah, and this is building on what I said earlier, that often the first people to something, especially if it's outside their culture, right, are prepared to jump over any hurdles and language barriers and jump on a plane and fly far away. But yeah, removing those barriers can only be a good thing to the cultural shift, especially if it's done, as you say, with mindfulness and compassion and taught as just methods. I think really key to something I want to pick up on is the idea that it's a continuous process, a journey, not a destination. And I hear that again and again with various topics I've been touching on, like love and a loving relationship. You can't just tick a box and be like, cool, we got married, done, check. It's a continuous, love is a verb, right? Like a continuous practice. The same with someone declares themselves as an ally to people of color. And it's like, no. You are the continually choosing to ally with us as time goes by. It's not, people want desperately to check the box and be, destination reached. Level unlocked, high score, brilliant. Okay, I'm a good person. What's next? And unfortunately, despite the comfort that sense of completion gives our minds, it is fleeting and unattainable.
Mm-hmm. Which, this is really interesting. Let me ask you something, Stephen. Does your sect have the concept of the 10 worlds, or is that strictly a Mahayana thing?
I've never heard of it, so it must be a Mahayana thing. It sounds quantum physics again, but we're talking about 9 or 10 dimensions. We're talking about string theory. But
that's super cool. Yeah, I'll say that it definitely lines up with that, but just because I like the idea of it. So the 10 worlds are the 10 life conditions. This was originally believed to be 10 actual separate places and dimensions, but by modern Buddhists, or at least by my sect, it's held to be more states of mind. So the 10 worlds run the gamut, the lowest world being hell, followed by the world of hungry ghosts, followed by the world of animals, followed by the world of humans, and then up to, the worlds of, I think the first is the voice hearers, the second is the arhats, I forget the exact English translation for that, up to the world of the bodhisattva and the Buddhas. So essentially and I talked about this at the beginning with the doctrine of Ichinen Sanzen, 10,000 realms in a single moment of life. At any moment of the day, your head, where you're thinking, what you're feeling, your relationship to the world can be in any of these realms. Hell can be compared to somebody who is suffering from very severe depression, or just having a minor depressed moment where you feel that you have very little freedom of movement, very little control over the world, and there's a great deal of suffering in that condition. The realm of hungry ghosts can be compared in extreme circumstances to somebody who is like an addict, but it's essentially the realm of chasing desire, of trying to add something to yourself that's going to fill this hole inside you, supposedly. And that could be drugs, it could be working out, it could be finding a lover, checking that box and getting married. You could be in the realm of hungry ghosts, depending upon how your attitude towards that act actually is. Going up from there, the world of animals is kind of a sort of law of the jungle, where there's very little long-term thought, and you tend to fawn over stronger beings and abuse weaker beings. From that world, you've got the world of the humans, which is described as tranquil, and it is the only world where you have the ability to escape the 6 lower worlds. You have the chance to make the jump and move towards a higher state of consciousness, because only Buddhas can become enlightened. Devas and heavenly beings and all that can't, despite how powerful they may or may not be, if they did exist. So beyond that, you have the world of the Asuras. I compare this oftentimes to like the worst kind of social justice warrior. Like that activist that is, they give the outer appearance of propriety and morality, but it's really coming from a very egotistical place where they feel a competitive drive to be better than everyone around them. And so they often will behave in very destructive ways, and this can lead to some awful things happening, like purity spirals, where people attack everyone around them, and it essentially becomes a pecking party where everybody tears everyone else down as part of a social movement.
I didn't realize Twitter was an astral plane of Buddhism.
Exactly. Twitter's a perfect example of the world of anger. Yeah, / Asuras. And so, like, you essentially, samsara is bouncing around between these lower 6 worlds. And it's at those moments of clarity that you suddenly get the desire to be like, how do I get out of this rat race? How do I get off this wheel? And so first thing people tend to do is they go and they try to find a guru. They try to find a religious tradition or something, or someone to teach them. That's the voice hearers. Then you move from that to the Prakyata Buddha. There we go. That's the private Buddhas. That is the world where they realize that the answers that they're looking for are not within the teachers, so then they look inside themselves. And they gain a measure of success and peace through this, if they're successful with it. But there's another world beyond that. That is the world of the Bodhisattva, where, you are motivated by great compassion to return to the world and to share this with other people. With Soka Gakkai, one of the things that we'll say is that, all of our members, we are bodhisattvas of the earth. And it's a specific type of bodhisattva that is described in the Lotus Sutra. Through the path of the bodhisattva, through great compassion, you eventually find a way to reach the path of the Buddha. It's kind of like trying to figure out escape velocity from the earth, just, using your mind and the experience of life. But, ultimately, Chris, you talked about how people are looking for that moment. They're looking for that to arrive because of how our education system works, and how everybody's thinking, if I can get this thing.
And how endorphins and serotonin work.
Exactly. But, the fact of the matter is that enlightenment, the blow out, that's nirvana, the blown out state, the release your breath, because the next breath is coming, is not a state where you spend all your time in that heaven realm, where, that's also, by the way, one of the other 10 worlds is heaven, where desire is fulfilled. But heaven doesn't last, essentially. You'll get knocked down to the other 6 worlds.
And the funny thing is, I always thought the idea of heaven not lasting would be a nightmare. But as you said, if you had this wonderful exhalation
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't know that the next in-breath was coming, that wouldn't be a good feeling. It would be a panic.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, what Daisaku Ikeda has described enlightenment as is he's likened it to surfing. In the way that you surf the ups and downs of life, and that the frustrations and obstacles become a part of the overall joy of living, of experiencing this moment, because when you are enlightened, you essentially begin to realize that what we are faced with is not something serious, but ultimately something playful. You can actually die. Like, this body can, but the atoms and everything that makes it up is just going to be reincarnated as literally everything else. So, as great as life as an individual is, you don't want to cling to it because there's a lot more coming. And also, in the event that if you ever could cling to it, I think it would get really, really boring very quickly. I think immortality is not something that we actually want.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's the crux of it. Consciousness. Let's focus on consciousness now. Obviously, from a Buddhist perspective, I think we agree on a hell of a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And you just asked about the 10 realms, but I know the 6 realms, which is what it's usually divided into. That's why I said that. The asuras, the heavenly beings, the humans,
Yep.
the animals, hungry ghosts, and the hell realm. So it's a 6. And the only realm from which you can become enlightened, as you said, is the human realm.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only realm where we actually are 100% conscious. And I think it's beautiful, whether it's, however it's divided, it is like this. It comes back to a question of awareness, because you can be in a state of extreme pain or extreme pleasure, but not have awareness of it. And you can't cope with, you're not prepared to cope with anything. And I see this, I bring it back to awareness. And I think about myself, because I think about the whole question of quantum physics and time and reality, and the fact that, as I told my father, I don't think consciousness ever dies. What happens is you have to, it'll stop. And it's the pure, it'll stop when it stops. When you realize that, okay, I'm riding this wheel, let me just become 100% aware of this. To me, Buddhism explains it perfectly. I do apologize if I bring science in to make an argument for what a lot of people see as religion, but it explains what consciousness can do, which is become aware of the fact that everything is chaos, and the moment you step aside and see it, you're fine. So what do you think? What happens? We live, we die, what happens?
Well, that was my question. Is reincarnation a metaphor? Because I've seen a lot of Buddhists see it as literal, and they're like, next time I think I'd like to be a baker.
Well, it's both.
That would be cool.
It's not a metaphor, because look at this, it's not, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think consciousness bounces back and forth. If you think about the irreality of time, and look at dreams, what happens when we dream? So please, Brenton, over to you.
Yeah. Well, are you asking me what dreams, or do you want me to respond to what?
I want you to focus on consciousness now, and I'd love to hear your view on this.
Yeah.
It's just something that could go anywhere, can go anywhere, and it literally is about us becoming more and more aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
No, I think you're right. So this is interesting with, I have seen the way reincarnation, the way I've come to understand reincarnation and karma and all of that, as a way of having your cake and eating it too. So the first thing to understand about reincarnation, when you ask, is it a metaphor or is it literal? The answer is yes. And yeah, so like you have reincarnation in the sense that the first thing to understand is that there is the doctrine of Anatman, which is, I believe, universal in most Buddhist sects. Anatman is no self, no soul.
All Buddhist sects, I'm sure, all Buddhist sects.
Yeah.
It's not Buddhism if you don't have that is the key, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very important. So the idea that, like, this, when reincarnation was first explained to me by my mother, you know, and she's coming from a Western background and everything, she explained it essentially as, like, if you're a really good dog, then you die, and then your next life you get to be something better than a dog. Or if you're bad, you get knocked down. It's the idea that there is this soul, this ghost inhabiting a body that comes into the world. Alan Watts famously said, no, you didn't come into this world at all. You grew out of it. So what I would compare it to is, if we're talking about like a soul, Brahman or whatever, it wouldn't be individual ghosts driving meat suits, you know. It would be one big soul that's just reincarnating into everything, both conscious and unconscious, at all times. And it only appears separate because the conscious experience isn't a necessarily singular experience. It is the universe eyeing. You know, everybody is I. And in fact, I use that in my first issue of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, that said you got to remember everyone is I. So if you want to talk about reincarnation, I mean, you've got the fact that energy is neither created nor destroyed. And the fact that when I, Brent, this body dies, I'll go into the ground and, you know, it'll be reborn as grass and as everything else. I was in a religious debate, actually, and I was talking about reincarnation, and somebody was like, oh, by his logic, grass on the grave is reincarnation. I was like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. So first you've got general reincarnation, that literally the organic matter dies and rises again as more life. Or as Wendell Berry puts it, you know, when a tree dies into more life, deserving more but not desiring more. But then you've also got the idea of specific reincarnation, that is this life that's lived in 1600 comparable to a life lived in 2020, comparable to a life lived in 2030 or whatever? Can we say that this is the same person coming back? And yet the answer is yes and no, in the sense that, you know, Chris, you're a musician. Every time you replay a song, is it the same song? Well, in one sense, yes, it is the same song. You're going through the same pattern or a very similar pattern to what you've done before, but also it's completely new every single time you play it.
Different mood, different feeling, different environment.
Exactly. And so
so
you can see how individuals can be reincarnated and everything can be reincarnated generally, and both happen at once, and both are absolutely 100% real and obvious. We just don't think about it because we get caught up on this idea of continuity of thought and memory, because we are creatures that remember. So people are like, but if you are reincarnated and you don't remember your old life, it makes no difference if there is continuity or if there is just the perception of continuity. It's the exact same thing from your perspective. So I mean, that's my feeling on reincarnation.
I mean, think about this. What happens? You have an amazing dream. Mm-hmm. You wake up in the morning and you remember the dream. It's amazing. And now you don't note it down. An hour later, you can't remember what the fuck happened. And this happens all the time. You know this. I'm sure this is, you know, the way it's incredible how when we wake up, we remember that moment when we're in the dream, especially if it's quite a vivid or lucid dream. Mm-hmm. It just all seems so clear. Then you wake up and you're like, yeah, if I write this down, this could be a movie. This could be an amazing book. 15 minutes go by and you're like, what the hell was happening?
there was a car, and I was split in two, and there was a dog talking to me. No, it's gone. Sorry.
It's gone, but it's there, and that's the weird thing, because the memory is there. And I was talking to my daughter today about this, and she said, yeah, I can remember my dream so clearly, it's ridiculously, but I can't explain it to you.
Well, it's like the, what was it, one of the famous, I think it was maybe, it's one of the saints, but he said, I know what time is, but if you ask me, I don't. Like, there's the feeling of understanding, but then you try to speak it, and blah, 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 everything gets jumbled.
Gents, I honestly could talk about this for hours. I wish we were all in a room having whatever we wanted to drink and a good old chat. I would like to take us home. I think we'll do one more question and then maybe share some quotes to end with. So I know Brent and Steve both, let's not put misleading labels on it, but let's just call it maybe Marxist communist adjacent. Like, if that offends you, feel free to correct me, but you get what I'm alluding to. How then do you feel about Buddhism, especially in the lay population? But we hinted at it with Japan, we see it in Thailand, we see it in India, often used to justify class hierarchy. So hopefully you're familiar with this, because I see it all the time, right? Oh, well, that's some person's rich because of they did good karma in the last life, and if you have good karma, then you could become rich too. And it's just world theory justifies the system as it is, class structure, why people are rich and why people are poor.
Mm-hmm.
Could I say something quickly?
Sure, go for it.
Sure, and then you go for it, Brenton, and then I'll come back. But Ajahn Chah, as I've told you, one of the major Thai forest monk teachers, said, "Be a worm."
Beautiful.
That's why he's not very popular in Thailand as a Buddhist teacher, and at the same time respected enormously. Everyone respects him, no one practices what he teaches. But the big teaching in Thai Buddhism is be a worm. One of the things that comes up again, but he said, just be a worm. Be meaningless. Learn to be meaningless, and then you'll understand.
Mm-hmm.
Learn to let go. Learn to not have any self. I mean, I think it's clear from everything we've talked about. We've been speaking for 2 hours now that we know what that means. But that's it. Thailand has a huge problem with this question that Chris asked. And the Thai forest tradition has been a bit of a, like, what would be the term, Chris? They're not, the establishment is not comfortable with the Thai forest tradition.
It reminds me very much of the Franciscans, who always criticized the Catholic Church practice of taking money, and so they just stayed away from money altogether. And even when the Catholic Church was purging all sorts of sects for disagreeing with it, using the Knights Templar, the Franciscans were able to escape criticism because they were above it. But yes, at the same point also, you understand they can't outright criticize the whole system and the government for obvious reasons. Survivorship bias again. Anyone that's around is because they haven't picked a fight with someone big and powerful. I'm going off on a tangent, but I love it. There's a fascinating story of where the Japanese and Chinese warrior monk tradition comes from. There was these raiding armies walking past, looking for stuff to loot, looking for land to take, and they promised, but if you train in mindfulness, your warriors will become fearless of death. And so they actually made this deal, so that they wouldn't get harassed by the warriors. And of course, the two sides ended up influencing each other, and so that's how you end up with these kung fu monks.
Yep.
But I digress. Over to you, Brent.
No. So that's also fascinating, by the way, because a lot of Nichiren Daishonin was very much a thorn in the political establishment side. They tried to have him executed twice I think on one of them he has to go pray at a shrine, and then like chewed out the deity at the shrine, was basically like, you better do something because they're about to kill me, and that's going to go really poorly for you. And so like they were about to chop his head off, and there was a freaking like eclipse. And they like lost their minds and just let him go because they're just like, okay, wow, this guy has so much spiritual power. A lot of his followers were samurai as well. So this is, I consider myself, or at least what I'm most interested in, politically speaking, I'm like a Kropotkinite anarchist. I'm very interested in the Spanish tradition. Like the CNT-FI, anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-communism. And I've actually written a biography of Buenaventura Durruti, who is basically I have written a movie based upon a biography of Buenaventura Durruti, who's basically the anarchist Che Guevara, which just recently got optioned by a small film company in England and Spain, so that's really exciting. I think.
Congratulations! That sounds awesome.
The guys are really behind it and telling Durruti's story. He's one of the great unsung heroes of the world. And you know, the film that I wrote is also very spiritual. So the thing is that, and I will be coming out with a comic series as well. I've actually got the first issue already drawn, and we're going to be moving on that. So it's really exciting. But to answer your question, as far as class structure and it being justified by ideas of karma and reincarnation, this is ridiculous. And I've seen it done a lot. The idea that I think in one of my debates, a guy mentioned that one of the things that his Christian sect was doing in Malaysia was trying to get people out of prostitution, because people's parents would sell them to a pimp, and the pimp would say, you were awful in your previous life, and your karma is you have to serve me, which is ridiculous. One of the important things to understand is that karma can be changed, in the sense that karmic retribution, the idea that something is good or bad or neutral, is happening now within reality because of something that happened in the past. We do see that chain of causality, but it's also not real entirely. We know that the primary theory of time is a B theory of time, and it's that all times exist at the same time and in the same place. It's a lot like distance, and we only experience it separately. So the idea that the past causes the future is intuitive, but it isn't real. It's not right. It's more the present causes the past, and the past moves back like a wake from a ship. So this comes into a very important doctrine within Nichiren Buddhism, which is the simultaneity of cause and effect. It doesn't happen separately. It's not a cause and there's an effect later. It's a cause-effect. And as a result of this, the idea that current class structures should remain, and that current people should be rewarded and other people should be punished based upon all of it, it's ridiculous. It's just vanity, and it's people getting snagged by the Devil King of the Sixth Heaven. Who's, by the way, that's the Nichiren. It's one of the Nichiren versions of Mara. It's and I find it very interesting because they hold that the Devil King of the Sixth Heaven lives in the highest world of desire, and one of his names is he who is freely enjoying the fruits of those conjured by others. Like, my sex devil is literally like a freaking capitalist. So, like, there are, I think that what happens is that, again, ego comes in, and the idea that an individual can gain at another individual's loss is not correct. It's like, if the cells in your body suddenly decided to start having a war with each other or to oppress other cells or something. So that's something that needs to be seen through. Now, that said, I'm a big believer in human revolution as opposed to, necessarily violent revolution. Through understanding, through perceiving the world as it is, and through perceiving our own relationship with ourselves and with each other, it awakens great compassion. And I think people can come to a higher state of being where we don't abuse and exploit each other voluntarily. It will take time, but also all time is an illusion anyway. So it's more about perceiving it. And I really am much more attracted to the ideas of human revolution than necessarily some of the more radical revolutionary ideas that you've seen out of like the anarchist and Marxist schools. I think it's very important to remember that it is classic wrong view to think that we can kill our way to a better world, and that kind of action can actually produce the cause that we want. And I always kind of remember back that, Daisaku Ikeda, one of the formative experiences of his life was his older brother being drafted into the Japanese army in World War II. And before he left, he said to him, there's absolutely no glory in war. I'm doing this because I have to, because they will put me in jail if I don't. And he went off to fight and came home in a box. And Daisaku Ikeda realized very early that there is nothing in this world worse than war. And so I think we need to find a way to communicate on a higher level and to look past our own kind of more primitive animalistic natures and towards a more enlightened and humanistic way of behaving towards each other and towards one another. And what's also very important to understand is, again, like as I was talking with regard to the figure and the background, what's important also to remember is that we're not just ourselves, we are also our environment. And so it's difficult, but at the same time, we are the entire world, and we have a chance at any moment to realize it and to do something different. So, yeah, in a long, drawn-out way, I think that it's incredibly foolish to have a society with divisions, with hard, strict divisions of class and labor, where some people's lot in life is to work for peanuts and other people's lot in life is to enjoy ridiculous privilege. And I honestly think that it hurts both the people at the top and at the bottom. I think Donald Trump is probably one of the most unfortunate human beings in the world, to tell you the truth, to have been born where he was born and to rise to the heights that he rose to. The man is obviously miserable. And I actually shudder to think about being inside his head. And even though he's one of the people that I'm basically like, I'm a cat hissing at that. But unclean. But at the same time, I have compassion for that, for the boy he was whose father didn't love him. So, it's difficult. But ultimately, I do think these challenges can be overcome. What's important, though, is that however we go to overcome it, we need to overcome it from a position of compassion and humanism.
Amen.
That was, yeah. Go on, Chris.
Mate, I think that's the point to end it on. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I have nothing else to say. Beautiful.
gentlemen, if you have anything you'd like to share with people, please send me links and I will put them in all the show notes and descriptions. I just want to sincerely thank you for what was a lovely conversation, and if you'd be up for it again, so would I.
Definitely.
I would like to say, I would love to do this again. I would love to do this again.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about today is that we've never met before. We had no idea what was going to happen. Now,
those are always my favourite. You just,
the next one.
as soon as I started talking with Brent privately, not in the comments, that was a different side of the conversation. As it always is, I found it. One thing in the Facebook comments, another thing when you DM someone. It's like that meme of the dogs that are yapping at each other, and as soon as you open the door, they just like gently approach one another.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with the Facebook arguments and stuff. I've been a reply guy for a really long time. It's something of a sport to me.
Oh, that's how I see it, exactly. I see it as sparring. I enjoy it, right? I know exactly what I'm doing. I find it funny, like me and you knew exactly what we were doing. I was like, I gave as good as I got, and it was like, it's fine. Okay. Yeah,
I still don't understand exactly what the Facebook argument was about.
Oh, it's silly. It's
about a beautiful round off.
It's about eating meat
yeah.
and the environmental effects, and I think some of the statistics are overstated by vegans, but the particular video you shared, I think that guy does work for the meat
the meat industry.
Although it's if you work as a scientist in a field, you are going to be adjacent to the industry you've specialized in. So that's too easy a criticism to throw around, right? I think both sides probably overstate their case, and the statistics can be cut in many ways. So I thank you for opening up what was just presented previously as a done deal, right? Like this is, anytime it's like this is the truth, and I will hear no arguments to the contrary, we should be skeptical.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, yeah, so basically I had linked a video from a channel that I was only vaguely familiar with, and a lot of vegans got very mad at me.
As they do.
Yeah.
Well, moving on from that, Brent, do you actually play Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay, I figured. So I'm doing this cool project, two, but we'll talk about one. Where we're playing as historical figures, time traveling back through time.
That sounds freaking cool.
So we have Tesla, Rasputin, I'm Lord Byron.
Am I allowed to join in? I've never played Dungeons.
Well, I'd teach you how to play first, Steve, but you'd both be very welcome. If you have an idea which historical figure you'd like to play, be that Alan Watts or...
Alan Watts might be fun.
I think you'd be a great Alan Watts.
I could be Alan Watts. I could also, if you need a heavy, I could be Buenaventura Durruti or Nestor Makhno.
That would be amazing. Was it Kropotkin? Who was the anarchist who was like a badass with a machete?
Oh, that's so that was not a machete; it was a saber, and that was Nestor Makhno, who is
right. Yeah. My God! Please play Nestor Makhno. And our DM has got a master's in history and is very much a communist, anarcho-communist. So I think you guys would get along very well. Absolutely,
yeah. Nestor Makhno, and by the way, fun fact: Nestor Makhno and Durruti actually met. And Nestor Makhno pledged that when the Spanish Revolution started, he would be one soldier among many. Nestor Makhno has never refused to fight. But unfortunately, he died of consumption of tuberculosis right before the events of the Spanish Civil War happened.
Steve, you'd be very welcome as well, mate. I just need to get you on a first game to teach you how to play. But which historical figure would you most like to play as?
Well, I was going to say Alan Watts, but now...
Oh, well, there you go.
That way we can have an Alan Watts.
That's incredible.
Well, let's see.
I think Alan Watts there is a type of bard which just talks and uses reason and logic to confuse his enemies. So I think that would be brilliant.
And Alan Watts, yeah. If you don't play Alan Watts, I will. But
I think Nestor Makhno and Alan Watts would be the perfect combo here, gents.
That'd be phenomenal.
Okay, let's do it another time. I'm literally about to have my firstborn child probably tomorrow. So I will be out of service for a couple of months, but let's do this again soon. This was amazing. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Congratulations. This is huge.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm nervous.
This is going to be so much fun. You are responsible for the survival of a human being now.
I've only just got the hang of looking after myself.
No, hang on. This is very. This actually goes back to some Buddhist stuff. So in my sect, when my son was born 6 weeks premature, and I was living in Manhattan at the time. I was about $22,000 in debt, and I was a very uncertain future. And people in my sect actually came up to me. The YMD leader came and he said, "Don't worry about anything. Babies have their own fortune." And holy crap, is he right? Like, your kid is going to be fine. You're going to be an amazing father, and I'm very, very excited for you. By the way, if you're having difficulty trying to get them to sleep, try chanting if they're crying. It's been very useful to me. I'll send you a video on how to do daimoku.
Oh, please do. No, I really appreciate that, gents.
I told you yesterday, Chris, the happiest moment probably of my life, the one memory I had is the first. My daughter was actually quite a quiet daughter, but dude, the first time I sang to her, when she was about 2 weeks old, in the crib, I can't remember what I was singing. It wasn't Charlie, it was singing. I was singing probably a Beatles song, and she smiled.
Oh.
And she smiled. This was an incredible smile. This was something absolutely amazing. The beauty of the communion of that is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. I'll just say, by the way, so I'm going to be running a Kickstarter soon for my series. So whenever you come out from under this, I would love to be back on, hopefully while that Kickstarter is running, to promote it, with regard to whatever else. And I'll send you the links for stuff. This has been really, really fun, though. And
yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, if you have Robert Evans on, I really want to talk to him anyway. So because I'm.
I will. As I say, it will be an odd. He's ready to go now because I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Evans, Steve, but he's quite an amazing podcaster who's radicalized me more than most, I think.
Yeah, it's me too. Though I was following him back in his old days at Cracked, and. Yeah, I'd say I would have I'd just love to talk to him because I was actually really active with Occupy Wall Street, and
I love his take on that and how people got black-pilled from that movement.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that people got black-pilled, but I don't know. We can talk about Occupy at some point. In fact, that might be a good topic to do.
I would love to be a part of this, by the way. If we have a podcast about Occupy and about politics, I would love to be a part of it.
Yeah, Steve, mate, I've been trying to get you on for years. I'm glad you finally jumped on this chance.
I'm not good. Chris knows me. I'm an ultra introvert. It takes me time to, as you heard at the beginning, I get very nervous when I'm talking to people. Especially, I hate this. I hate the fact that we're not in the same room.
Well, maybe one of these days we will. That Dungeons and Dragons game sounds incredible, though, Chris. So I will send you the links. When is the podcast going to drop?
I'm probably going to pay someone else to edit this because otherwise it would take too long. So, it should be next week. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, I used to have a radio show, and on the actual radio, and I gave it up because I was editing it myself, and it's just so much time. That's why I moved to YouTube live streaming. I don't have to edit for the most part.
Yeah, I was saying to Steve, it's just there's something better about it. But
that's something funny because the last time I was on something like this, it was live, so I didn't have to worry. But the fact is, I thought that being pre-recorded, I could relax more, but I was actually more nervous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's normal. That's why I do 2.5 hours and honestly cut the first half an hour out, and you end up with a good podcast. All right, gents.
All right.
Most of what you said was incredible, and it reflects what I mean, what I feel, which is that Buddhism is, to me, this isn't being, I don't care if you record this and put this out or not, but Buddhism is the closest we've ever come to actually attempting to put into words the possibility of trying to understand what is going on a conscious level. Science is another thing. Forget science. We're talking about, an actual again, there are no words. We know this. This has been the whole point of this. But
we gave it a good shot, guys. I'll bounce and leave you in the room if you want, but my wife is giving me evils.
You're being told.
Yeah,
hey guys, it's beautiful. A lot of what you said, Brenton, was absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
So almost nothing for me to say.
Absolutely. All right. It is 5:30 in the morning for me right now, so I'm gonna go to bed. But yeah, dude, feel free to friend me on Facebook. And I really enjoyed talking to you. I was very intimidated to speak to a monk, so this was this was great. All right, I'll catch you later.
Well, I'm not a monk. Let me make that clear. I don't know how I have been a monk. I was a monk. I go to very Theravadan retreats quite often.
Mm-hmm.
But I am actually, I think the linking point between us is Alan Watts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Alan Watts. I am very much, and I bring this to my group here all the time. It's like, I want to bring controversy to it because I think that the moment you start latching onto opinions and thoughts, as we've done all evening, you're fucking it up. So,
yeah, I would agree. Watts, honestly, I was so lucky to discover him, and I honestly think he's one of the few public intellectuals who's worth a damn. But yeah, I will talk to you later, though. This has been great, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the podcast coming out. I will catch you later, okay?